because I do 1,300 crunches and sit-ups 4 times a week.
What's a dose? Can you translate for us?
Winner of the gold medal and the champion golfer of the year is Ernie Els.
Hey everyone, it's Terence here. I am very excited to bring you episode 14 of this podcast, The Go Track, where we cover all things golf and honestly quite often golf adjacent stuff in South Africa. This is our second guest interview episode, and this week I chat to Guy Smith, the visionary behind the Gowrie Farm Golf Club in Nottingham Road, KZN. Guy talks us through the history of his obsession with classical golf course design and the path that led him to designing and constructing his first course on a very tight budget. If you haven't been to Gowrie Farm, you really need to set aside a few days to visit and truly appreciate the masterpiece that Guy and his partners have created there. It is currently considered a short course, and although it has only got 12 greens, it kind of feels like a full different 18 holes that you play there. It has received numerous global accolades, including the 4th best short course in the world in 2014. I recently spent an evening up in Nottingham Road with Guy and his new partners in Gowrie Farm, that is Dale Hayes and Roger Newman at Gowrie, and Guy was kind enough to walk me around the course, which they are now actually extending into a full 18 holes. So we talk about the new 7 holes that have been designed and laid out, and the special type of experience that Guy, Dale and Roger want to create for their guests at Gowrie. Enjoy, and over to the podcast now. So, Guy, thank you so much for giving us your time today. When I recently spent some time with you in Nottingham Road, you sort of regaled the story of I think you were sitting in a doctor's waiting room or something like that, like 30 odd years ago, and you made the decision then that you wanted to build a golf course. Can you kind of give me some background on how you came to that decision and what happened in your life leading up to that point?
No, I wouldn't say how I came to the decision. I had never really thought about it before then. But what actually happened is, I grew up in Joburg, and when Bryanston was still like living in the country, and we had access to Bryanston Country Club. As juniors, we didn't have to pay, and we could jump the fence over behind the old second green and stroll down to the course and play. And school holidays were spent most days on the golf course. But about, I think it was 1990, I was in a doctor's waiting room and picked up, I think it then would have been a personality magazine, and there was a filling in a questionnaire. One of them, what is your long-term goal? And without really even giving it much thought, I put there to build a golf course. And I think that was sparked by having, in 1976, when Di and I were traveling around America, hitchhiking through South and North America, we were fortunate enough to watch the Masters. And I think it was that, having seen Augusta, which was then my sort of model, never having played any of the links courses at that stage, that I felt I'd love to build a golf course. And once I'd written it down, it was funny how things just snowballed from there without having given it much thought. I was asked to come and have a look at a piece of land on the north coast by a good friend who's developing now down on the north coast. And he said, let's buy this farm and we'll get 10 houses and we'll build a place there. And I said, count me in. I was then an attorney in Maritzburg practicing and had a cottage down at Thompson's Bay. But the golf course thing didn't really start going until suddenly I thought that would be a great piece of land. And when Glenn was unable to buy the land, I said to him, well, do you mind if I try and buy it? And hence started an 8-month negotiation with Raj Bodasing, who owned the land, or 6 to 8 months. And eventually we bought it, and that really got the idea of a golf course going full steam ahead.
And that would be, obviously, for people who aren't aware, that would be Princess Grant.
Princess Grant.
And in terms of that project, the actual laying out of the golf course, how involved were you in terms of designing of holes, and the sort of the layout of it?
I must say at the outset, that was Peter Makovich's design. I think I was very involved from the point of view of I knew certain things which I didn't want, probably more so than what I knew what I wanted. And Peter, I'd known Peter for some years, and he was fantastic. He firstly did the whole thing on risk, the layout plan, which I can assure you most people thought was a crazy idea. This attorney in Maritzburg with no cash, going to build a golf course. And Peter was kind enough to do all the preliminary work, the layout, the routing. And interestingly enough, we went through sort of each hole together once he came up with it. And I did my own routing, and it so turned out that a lot of the holes were the same. Certainly the clubhouse, the first hole and the last hole were his and mine were the same. But certainly I claim very little, save that I said I didn't want palm trees, I didn't want rocks, which Peter was using a lot at that stage. I wanted to follow the Augusta model where the grass ran into the water. We do have some, shall we say, cable ties now, they call them, I think. That wasn't there when we finished the course initially. And there have been a few additions since the homeowners took it over, which were features that weren't there when we finished the course. And the one condition I had was that every green site I had to inspect the drawings before we signed off, and each green site had to be signed off by me before we did it. But as I say, I would give Peter 95% credit for what you see on the ground. And the 5% were just really instructions that I gave him that I wanted, but that is Peter's golf course, and I think he did a great job for us. Not an easy piece of land, although he said so initially. It was quite a difficult piece of land when I look back on it, and I think Peter got most of it right. He did a great job.
Yeah, and certainly some sort of really iconic holes from a KZN perspective. I think I'm sure it must have been a excellent learning curve for you in what would then sort of translate into your own projects. So, between kind of the end of Princess Grant and the beginning of Gowrie Farm, what happened during that period of time, and how did the Gowrie Farm project end up being initiated?
Well, it was interesting. While doing Princess Grant, I had the good fortune of meeting an architect, a chap, John Rushmere from Port Elizabeth, who came to have a look at it. And he was critical of what we were doing from an architectural point of view. And basically he gave us a long lecture one morning on how to create places and spaces, and in particular how villages developed. And that really became what I gained out of Princess Grant, is that I ended up getting more hooked on the urban design than anything else, the golf course. But I sort of we did what I wanted to do, which was build a golf course. I wanted it in the traditional style and traditional golf club. Initially, we made all people wear long socks and et cetera, et cetera. But we actually didn't even want carts even on Princess Grant when we started. But this architecture then became a fad where I got fascinated, studied it for 20 years, traveled around the world going to villages. And it was then that I was asked to get chatting to a farmer from Nottingham Road. I spoke to him about that Nottingham Road should become a village. And without going into the whole story about it, I ended up getting involved to build what was Gowrie Village with Jub Green, who owned some of the land. He wouldn't sell it. He said, I'll put the land in and I want to be a partner. And that started what's been a very happy 20-year relationship. But also, more important is while we were doing it there, Jub had the neighbouring farm. And he said, look, this farm's too small for dairy farming now. Let's do something with it. And we said, well, why don't we put a golf course? And that's so from the village, the idea of having developed the village, the golf course came. I again got Peter Makovich involved. And in fact, Peter did a layout there. And I realized I couldn't have, with a small project, we only had 125 houses, you couldn't really build a golf course in the normal course of events by what is spending a lot of money, most of them do. And I realized that 3 of the top 5 state courses of America were built by people building their first-time golf courses. That was Pine Valley, Pebble Beach, and Marion. So I said to my partners, chaps, look, then we go and do a trip overseas again. By then, I'd done about 10 trips to Scotland. And with the purpose of looking at it was Pioneers number 2, Merion and Dornoch were the sort of 3 courses I spent a lot of time at. And I'll go design it myself and build it. And that's how it went. We came back, Peter had done a layout, and I went off to pay for it. And he said, if you use it, pay me. If you don't, throw it away. And as it turned out, we didn't use any of the layout as designed by Peter. We routed it completely differently. Department of Agriculture limited us to 9 holes. And we couldn't put houses around the holes, which was great. Because they said if it ever has to go back, if the course fails, they want to be able to convert it back to farming. So that's how we kicked the whole scheme off. As I say, I spent a week in the archives of Donald Ross, spent time up at Merion, and then spent a week up at Dornoch.
Yeah, so I wanted to touch a little bit on the village component, because I think one of the sort of standout things about Gowrie is the fact that it is not just a golf course development. The housing was done simultaneously, but I think one of the unique things about it is obviously that you're not playing golf around a residential estate. It very much feels like it is a standalone golf course. So it sounds like that was partly imposed on you, but it also suited the design principles that you had researched. How do you describe the details around what your kind of core design principles were that you picked up on from the courses you mentioned, Merion, Dornoch, Pine Valley? What were kind of the key principles that you could bring to life on the property that you were given at Gowrie?
Terence, I said I wanted a classic course, an old traditional classic course, and I put out some principles that I considered what one finds in a classic course. And the first was that the tees are close to the ground. If you go to a place like Pinehurst, some of the tees you can hardly even differentiate. They're just flat, and or at the level of the fairways, and they're just part of the fairways. Some of them are raised, but not much. So that was my first criteria. Secondly, the fairways in all of the courses I mentioned, I don't think you get the feeling that there has been little or no work done on the fairway from the point of view of bulldozers and that stuff. Bearing in mind the 3 courses I mentioned were built a long time ago, and they weren't building golf courses with bulldozers as we are today, where we can change the terrain so much. So the first thing was then you had to route it so that you didn't have to move much soil. And the third thing was that the greens is where all the work used to be done. It's where you get your push-up greens, and one tries to give some interest in and around the greens, creating swales and lifting the green surface, which is what I did with the greens. And then the other crucial thing was that the tees were to be close to the greens, so that it was a walking course, and that you didn't have these long walks between tee and green, which so many of the modern courses have today, because they have the luxury of golf carts and golf cart paths. And I may say developers are pushed into a corner where the houses take priority over the golf course. In both the estates I've developed, the golf course got first priority and houses second. So that's really were the principles that I try to work with. And the other thing I felt was important is that you don't want to spend your life looking for golf balls off the tees, so we try to make the fairways fairly wide in the driving zone and take shots away from people around the green. So the ball tends to run away from the greens if you miss them, not to them, but you don't lose your ball. I think a lot of the modern courses have the opposite, where there's a lot of holes where the ball runs into the green, very much like the punch bowl type thing, even if they're artificial ones. Whereas a lot of the old traditional ones didn't have these mounds at the back and the side. The ball tended to run away from the green if you missed the green. And that's what we really set out with. And we did it we built the whole course with a tractor and a dam scoop, and a small bulldozer which we used on the greens. The chap who built dams, in fact, who knew nothing about golf, drove the bulldozer for us, and we worked. very much with a chap, Brian Paxton, who was fantastic, a young guy who'd worked on a golf course before. He ran everything on the ground and did a great job for us, I think. And consequently, we built it for a fraction of what.
So, so at the time you were limited by a certain footprint, and I know you said you were limited to sort of 9 holes. I think with the routing you did end up having 12 green sites and some different tee boxes. How did you come about sort of trying to route that course in a way that I think personally I think one of the unique things about Gowrie, although it is currently statistically will be called a 9-hole course. It certainly doesn't feel that way when you go around it. How did you sort of go about reaching some of those different holes with different tee boxes and some of the different elements that you brought in, dams, so using some of the water courses and that? Was that process, the routing process, fairly straightforward, or were there some sort of areas that took you a while to sort of find the perfect match there?
Yeah, look, I'm fortunate the dams were already there. It was a very good farm, and Jep Green had the dams for irrigation purposes, so we didn't have to build any dams. They added interest. The routing, fortunately, it was an easy piece of land to walk, and it had, funny enough, while it looked a flat piece of land, when you walk it, it has more elevation than people realize, I think. And I just walked and walked and walked that course, funny enough, and using an aerial photograph and contours. We routed it. It took me quite a lot of time, spent a lot of time playing around with it. As I say, I had as a starting point Peter's routing, but as I say, his first hole, for instance, would have gone from our 4th green to our 1st green. So it was totally different, but it gave me some idea. And I learned a lot with working with Peter at Princess Grant when we did routing. And we had wonderful discussions. I think Peter and I think it was one of the few times where Peter had worked with a developer who was more interested in golf than he was in development. And we had a lot of fun at Princess Grant. Peter taught me a hell of a lot. And we had great debates, if I can call them disagreements, debates, but we had a lot of fun sorting out routing, how holes should be, etc. And we did a trip to Scotland together, Peter and I as well. It was my first trip to Scotland. That was in '93. And well, the first year. And we had 2 weeks of great fun there, but also playing every hole, but discussing every hole that we played almost there. And so it was a lot of fun together. And I certainly learned a lot from Peter. Yeah, and so the routing, eventually became a routing. And sorry, what I did do is I felt going 9 holes one round after the other, and that's where I'd seen a place like Boschhoek, which we played it a lot, and I wanted to be different. So 1, I didn't want to plant trees, and 2, I felt that if we used par 3s, because we had a piece of land, quite a large piece of land, we could use par 3s to take you away from the existing tee. And our perfect example is you go first, second, and then you play the first again, which is our 10th. And I used a par 3 to push you away. So when you played what was the second green, it came from a totally different direction. Hence, we ended up with 5 par 3s, which you play all of them only once, and they were really used to move you around. I used those to move you further away from the original tee positions, and I just felt there was enough space to do it. And if I could do that, I could make the holes feel different.
And during that process, Guy, did you have in mind that at some stage you may complete the course and have additional land to build on when you were doing that initial routing? Or at that stage, did you think that you were going to be limited, in terms of its current footprint? And how have you? And we'll get onto the new holes now. That I think that you've built and designed. How hard or easy has it been to sort of try and incorporate sort of new design and new holes with an existing course and working out that routing?
We always knew that if we were going to do it, go to 18 holes, we would have to go out to Brookdale because the land just drives you that way. No other option. That's really what you want. But I must admit, after the success of the first 9, and I think it was more successful than I had anticipated. I didn't think people got to enjoy it, and there was some, it was considered an 18-hole course by a lot of people. I always said I'd never build the additional holes because financially, I thought it would be financial suicide. And then we did think that, I thought, well, let's get the approvals through. And then if we sell the land, at least the approvals in place, and that will add value to the property. So it was that intention we started. And then the Department of the Environment put a lot of emphasis on the financial model, which forced me to then spend time with people like Derek James, Freddie Beaver, that's the Wild Coast and South Broome, and all the courses on the coast, Princess Grant. And the more I spoke to people, the more I realized that actually if we wanted to make it sustainable, the answer was we had to go to 18. So this idea that you could sit back and not go to 18, because as Derek said, he said, if I had to lose 9 holes, he said we'd close down very quickly because a lot of our rounds come when we're busy and we could get over 200 people through. If we were 9 hole, we'd only get 100 people through. And most of our touring groups wouldn't come and play us if we were a 9-hole course. They'd play the 18-hole courses. And then Princess Grant closed down at 9 holes to change the greens. And suddenly I had the actual statistics of what had happened to the rounds of golf. And visitors' rounds dropped 67% in the first year when Princess Grant closed the 1-9 to regrass the greens. And when I got that figure, you could see, according to the people there, people were driving up to Princess Grant not knowing it was 9 holes, turn around and go back to Mhlali rather than play a 9-hole course. So as much as one can kid oneself about 9-hole courses, people don't really go out of their way to play 9-hole courses. And it was something that I suddenly realized myself. I'd been putting golf tours together for nearly 40 years, and I'd never included a 9-hole course on any of the trips that I had. So once that suddenly became reality, I realized, well, we've got to go for 18 holes, and so we pushed ahead. I may say that my partner Jub was very nervous, and in fact, as a result of I think his fears, he sold out. So because he felt that we were taking too big a risk going to 18.
And once that decision was made, in terms of now routing the new holes, and we can go into them a little bit, but did you feel like you had walked that land previously? Did you have a good sense of how you would lay that those additional 7 holes out, or was that a little bit tricky working with that land? How different was that land to where the existing course is now?
I had thought of it quite often over the years. What would I do? How would we lay out 18 holes? So I'd walked it often and I'd drawn pictures, not believing I'd ever go ahead with it. But I'd given it a lot of thought over the years of what I would do, played around, walked it. I'd even gone so far as hitting a couple of balls at certain places. But once we decided, we started the application, I then had to sit down and start doing some work. And once we got doing it, I may say, once you get on the ground, sometimes things change. For instance, 1 or 2 holes are not quite like I always had them in mind. And you go to certain places which you want to do something, and the environmentalists say you can't touch that. So suddenly you'll see when we get to our 3rd hole and our 5th hole, for instance, we were dictated to quite strongly as to where we could put tees and where we couldn't put a fairway. And that made you rethink. And some holes, I always thought of those 2 medium-length par 4s. Well, it turned out to be a long par 4 and a short par 4. That was never part of the plan. But when you get down to the detail, that's what comes out. And I work very much a case of you don't force something onto the land. You rather work with the land. So for me, it's been very much a case of trying to fit what was there. I will say we found, unlike the first 9, the green sites there were no standout green sites when we did the second 9, so we had to do a lot of work on all the green sites there, which in the first 9 somehow they seemed to fit more easily. The green sites just seemed to pop out of the ground there. But this time we battled to find green sites, and then I don't know whether it's going to be good or bad, but that's the end result. I think I'm quite pleased with the way our green sites have turned out. But we did a lot more work on them than we did in the first night.
So I spent the morning. You very kindly hosted me a couple of weeks back, and we went out there very early in the morning, and just kind of walking people through the new, let's call it the new front nine at Gowrie, because essentially it's made up of seven new holes. We have the first hole, which I think everyone will be familiar with. Very iconic opening hole at Gowrie, and the second hole of the new routing will be the old 11th hole, which is the par 3, kind of across the sort of marshland. Personally, one of my favorite holes at Gowrie. Just in my opinion, there's something about standing on that tee. I love the visual look of that hole. I'd just like to talk a little bit now about the next 3 holes, the new 3 holes. The third hole, you drew a little bit of inspiration from a very famous course. Can you talk me a little bit through that hole and how you kind of came to laying it out?
I think more than the actual course, in the old course, where we got the inspiration, was more, I think I got it, is old CB McDonald. Over the years, which at the time when I was doing the first nine, I got very hooked on reading a lot about the old golf courses. One guy that I particularly liked was old CB McDonald, the father of American golf course architecture, who designed and built the National Golf Links. And what he did was he spent a lot of time in Scotland and he identified the holes he loved and the features of certain holes. And when he came to do the National Golf Links, he basically took that model where for instance, the road hole, he took and tried to recreate, but with using different elements. Where the road hole's got the sheds, he put in bunkers. He did the Red Ann, which a lot of people say his Red Ann is even better than the original Red Ann was the one. He had a number of others that he copied. And when I came to now build our third hole, I had in mind a par 4, sort of medium length par 4, and then the environmentalists took a whole area out and they said, you can't build there, that's wetland. And suddenly I had this area where I was going to have the drive going to suddenly becoming excluded. And I thought, hell, I should let that become my sheds. I'll take the same principle as C.B. McDonald. He had a bunker, and the old course got the bunker. He had a bunker. The old course had, the sheds. He had a bunker. And I thought, well, I've now got a wetland, so I can't do it. And I put the wetland in a similar position to that you'd find the sheds at and the road hole. And we created the road hole, something along the lines of that principle of the old road hole, which is obviously one of the most iconic par 4s. We also found rocks all over the place where people had moved the rocks to the side of the fields, they were pastures, and I decided to use those rocks. In the road hole, you've got the wall that runs down there on the other side of the road, and these rocks were just lying there. I said, well, we found a chap who could build stone walls. We built a rough stone wall and built that as the next tee. So that we took those elements. We kept the road hole bunker, which we put in there, but we've also got the 2 fairways, the one going to the left, as you would normally have for the people who don't want to try and take on the challenge of hitting over the wetland. They can play it as a par 5 almost with a safer route, and the young brutes will just go straight over that wetland, and they'll probably hit 7 irons in, 6 irons in for their seconds, playing it very much like the road hole. So that's really how we got the inspiration there. And we then came to the 4th hole, which now, because the road hole had lengthened this first hole, we had to change our whole thinking that I had there. Plus, we weren't allowed to go to put the one green site we thought we would be out overlooking a stream that runs there. But the environmentalists didn't allow us to go out there, and we had to now try and make a hole out of what was a very blandish piece of land there. And again, we took some of the ideas out of the first and second hole of the National Golf Links, for instance, where they had short par 4s around 130 yards, 300 meters. So we did something along the lines. We took certain features that came out of them. We didn't have the hollows that they did, so we made a little mound and we moved some earth around, which we had to. And we've ended up with which I think could be a very fun short par 4 of about 310 meters, which I think some people will go for the green, 300 meters. and we put in the bunkers. There we decided just to get some interest to it, you have to take on a whole series of bunkers down the left where you can take off 80 meters, or you can take the whole 230 meters of bunkers and go for the green. So we've tried to pick out little ideas that came out of those lovely 2 holes at the National Golf Links, the first and the second, semi-blind shots and that type of thing.
Yes, and I think driving around with you, and just for everyone listening, I think Guy pointed out to me that morning, that he's taken the exact distance. You've taken the exact distance from the green to where you've built the tee on the 3rd hole, which is essentially almost exactly the same distance as you have on the road hole at St Andrews to the wall. Small details like that. The 4th hole that you're describing, the short par 4, I think you've built the strategic elements in there where if you take on the bunkers down the left-hand side, you're given a much clearer line of sight to the green, whereas if you go down the right-hand side of the fairway, you essentially have a blind shot over the mound in front of the green. I guess those are all elements, that you've drawn on from sort of the risk-reward and some of those strategic elements of classical design, as opposed to sort of the more cookie cutter approach that you see on some of more modern golf courses. You touch on the rocks that you found. There were in those fields, and this obviously became this has now become quite a key element of the next hole, the 5th hole. Could you just talk a little bit through the evolution of that hole, where you started off with, and what is now on the ground, and people will be faced with, and how maybe that ties in with, again, another sort of template hole?
Yeah, that was interesting. There was a blue gum forest there, eucalyptus forest there, which Jubbs had planted many years ago because he said you couldn't use plow it. He said it was a terrible piece of land, and he didn't think we could ever to grow a fairway there. And unfortunately, we had to use it because in the approvals we had to use certainly bad blue gum land to put fairways in. What we did then is we got excavator, we de-stumped the whole lot there, and all we seemed to pull up was rocks. We pulled up hundreds of rocks, which we just kept pushing to the side of what would be the fairway. And eventually it turned out we got quite a nice fairway bed. There are still some rocks which we've had to turn into little mounds by covering them up. But there were just piles of rocks down the left, and I thought, I'll just leave them piled there. It'll be an interesting element. Until Duncan Price, who's been helping running the site, he said, look, well, I've got a chap, Owen, from Zimbabwe, who can build beautiful walls. So Owen, we then got hold of Owen, and we just left him. I said, try just a rough wall. Don't make it look too smart. Make it look as just a farmer had done it years ago. And what came to mind immediately when we started doing this, I thought, the Pit's one of my favourite holes in Scotland, if not my most favourite hole, is the Pit at North Berwick, where you've got a stone wall that runs all down the left-hand side, and then the green is on the over the wall. So you play your second shot over the wall to this green in like a punch bowl green. And I thought, this could be, what we should do here. We basically modelled it very much off the Pit. I've stolen a lot of the distances of the similar distance hole. We have a semi-blind shot, which is so typical of so many of the links courses. So it doesn't worry me that a lot of people say you shouldn't have blind tee shots. They're so much part of golf when you go to Scotland. And to me, match play golf, it doesn't really matter. So we've got a semi-blind tee shot there. In Scotland, they wouldn't consider it blind, but certainly South Africa, we will. And we built the wall running down there, and I've put the green on the other side, very much as they've done at the Pit. And we then built 2 mounds at the back there to give you some sort of target. And we had all the soil coming out of the roads, so we actually excavated the roads there. They had to get rid of the topsoil, and I said, just dump it all here. So we created 2 mounds, which forms a backdrop and the punch bowl effect of the Pit. One thing is differently, we have a green in this case that runs away from you, which I think will surprise a lot of people the first time they play it. But that again is also very typical of so many of the links courses. There's, the modern course always the green faces you and sits up, the back of the green's up, the lowest point's the front. Scotland, there are lots and lots of holes where the exact opposite applies, and you have to almost drop the ball short of the green and let it run into the green. And we've done that there at our fifth hole, which we've called the wall, and very much a case of you're going to have to drop it short of the flag and run it into the green. I think it'll probably be liked by some, but I think a lot of golfers in this country have got a very much South African mentality, which is more like the American idea, where it's stroke play, not match play, and these things certainly become more difficult to play. But I think I'm quite pleased with it. It's turned out quite well, and hopefully there'll be others who like it as well. But it's very much a typical links type hole.
My first impressions were really of those, particularly those 3 holes, were really that they're going to be outstanding as the grass grows in, and to me they embody the nature of a good golf course. Around the more you play it, the more that you learn about the hole, and the more that you realize there's 5 or 6 different ways to take on the hole, as opposed to a lot of the sort of cookie cutter type holes that we see across South Africa. So I think you've done a brilliant job in those 3 holes. The connectivity between them is really great, and then obviously after the 5th hole there's this beautiful sort of visual connectivity around as you exit the green site. You actually see the 6th hole, I think it's the 6th, the par 3, which is sort of downhill par 3 with quite a big carry over sort of the water where drainage canal that goes down there. Was that green site fairly obvious to you, the current 6th green site, as a par 3?
Not at all. I mean, that's one area where we thought, where on earth are we going to put the green? And it was funny. It was a whole lot of bramble and that. And the more we cleared, the more it suddenly just appeared. And eventually, it just came out of nowhere, sort of lifted out of the ground. And where we thought we had no green site, we ended up having what was just a natural green site. But it was really more by discovery, and certainly we had to move the hole because we were just cleaning up around there. And as we came to this, I just kept saying more and more, this is just the perfect place for the green site. We had it initially designed a lot further to the right, and but when we started cleaning up, it just told us that this is where you need to be. And so that green site in the end, we didn't do much to it; it was there.
Yeah, it's certainly from my viewing, and obviously I didn't see it before when it was covered with bramble, but just first glance at it, it looks just like a really natural green site. Just 2 more holes briefly, Guy, that I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but your 7th hole, you've designed a long, tough par 5. I know when we drove around, you mentioned you wanted to do a proper stroke 1 hole. As far as I remember, this is going to be the new stroke 1, which is the 7th hole, which runs now back up towards sort of the old course down the fence line. Just your thoughts a little bit on that particular hole. I know there's some interesting features you've created there as well.
But it's certainly a hole that probably I worry about most of all, because I think it could be, certainly for the likes of the short hitters like myself, is just going to be a monster. But I'm hoping that the big hitters will prove me wrong. We had to divide now we had partners coming in. Dale Hayes and Roger Newman have come in as partners to take over Jubb's position. So we had to put a boundary fence there for the farm. And I just immediately started thinking of the 9th at Muirfield and the 6th or Carnoustie, where they've got those boundary fences. Obviously, we all know the wonderful stories of Hogan at Hogan's Alley at Carnoustie. And I thought, well, we've got the fence there. It's on the other. It's on the right hand side, as against the 2 I mentioned were on the left hand side. So I quite liked that idea that it was slightly different from that point of view. But suddenly, this fence became the out of bounds fence, was the only out of bounds fence really that come in there. And I thought, well, let's introduce a Hogan's Alley. So I've introduced bunkers down the middle of the fairway, which will give you 2. We made it very wide, so you've got a 70-yard fairway where you've got sort of 30 yards between the fence and the bunker, and 30 yard, just over 30 meters on the other side. So it's a big fairway. But you've got the options if you can take the route where you take the out of bounds out of play on the left, but you can't get up in two for the big hitters. I think most of us aren't going to worry about getting up in two because it plays into the prevailing wind. It's going to play it very long, I think. But the good hitters will be able to go for it down the right-hand side, and I hope they can get there in two. It's but the way they hit the ball, I'm confident they will. And then I introduced the cross bunkers, because I play quite a lot at Muirfield, fortunately, and I love the cross bunkers at the 17th hole at Muirfield on that par 5. So I took the idea of introducing cross bunkers for your second shot. I thought they were well positioned until we've been playing them, hitting balls for the last few weeks, and finally it doesn't not even an option for me to go over the cross bunkers. I probably need to introduce a few more forward tees. But so it's a hole that's going to be tough, I think, with playing into the wind most of the time, and out of bounds all down the right with quite a lot of cross bunkers, as well as the middle of the fairway bunkers. So I think it's going to be a tough hole. It's one that does make me nervous. It'll definitely be stroke one. I have no doubt in my mind that it'll be the toughest hole on that golf course. But it gives me a bit of peace when I say, well, it's stroke one and we can get up in 4. That's fine. We can still make 6, and it gives us 2 points.
Exactly, and you've made a wide fairway there, so I think it will just be a case of, if the wind is in a certain direction, then it's going to be playing perhaps as a bogey hole for some golfers. Otherwise, potentially a birdie hole for the better golfers in the lighter wind. So that's sort of what a stroke one should be. I just briefly wanted to touch on. We then come back. There's the 8th hole is sort of a dogleg par 4. And then we come back towards now the sort of, which is now going to become almost sort of like the center of the new Gowrie golf course, the center point of the course, where you're going to be having a new halfway house from what I understand, which is the 9th hole, which is a short par 4, but quite a tricky green site that you've constructed with some bunkering there. Just briefly, your kind of thoughts around that hole when you were laying it out.
The thoughts were it was always going to be a short par 4. It was going to be, I had initially hoped, the only short par 4 on that back 9. I wasn't expecting the 4th to be so short. But that, as I say, the environmentalists posed us. And as a short par 4, I just felt, I love the short par 4s. I don't think you want too many of them, but you want to be able to have a hole, at least one, if not 2 holes, where the bigger hitters can try and drive the ball. And so this will play about 185 meters from the yellow tees. So it'll be very much drivable for a lot of chaps today. I've always said I'm not an original thinker. I'm just copy. And I love the postage stamp at Troon. I've always loved it and said, gee whiz, that's a hole I'd love to build. So we happened to build, well, what really started, we started moving some earth for a bunker on the left, and I just said, hell, this bunker is going to be underwater all the time. And we had a storm that night, came there, and that whole bunker was full. So I said, well, why don't we actually just dig it out here and just make it so that it can collect water, it can be an attenuation pond. And all the sand there, from there we used, and we built this tee up. And so we ended up with a tee very much, I took the dimensions of the postage stamp, which are about 9 yards by 26 yards, and we just took it to meters, so it's 10% bigger. And we took ideas from that. We're obviously not exactly in that, but I think it's going to be a fun little hole. There'll be a lot of birdies, but I think there'll be quite a lot of big scores, because if you miss the green, you run into bunkers, which are quite a long way from the green itself. And to up and down it is going to be a very difficult task, I think. So we'll get lots of 3s, but on the other side we'll have lots of 6s and 7s, I think. I'm hoping it'll be a fun hole. I think the more important is make it a fun hole, and it will be. Some people say, "Oh, it's so easy," until they pull it a little bit left or right, and I think they could end up posting some big numbers. But to have a little hole where they have, I had this experience, I may say, with our present 7th when we played it. I invited the top 24 top amateurs many years ago. And there were 10 in the top 20. And we had this little 275-yard hole on the first day, which stroke number 2. and we moved it back to its back tee at 330 and stroke number 16. So it was quite interesting. While it was short, everybody was going for it and paid the price. When they couldn't reach it, it was just a straightforward drive and a wedge. Short. So I'm hoping we'll get the same effect there.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I think that hole is going to be a very, very fun hole to play. I think it's going to be very interesting. The length of it, as you said, about 280. It's going to entice most people to drive up there. But I could see, particularly if there's a medal round going on, I can see quite a few people playing ping pong from either side of those side bunkers that you have there, because it's challenging bunker shots onto a narrow green. So certainly a hole I think people will probably play differently. Maybe the different times they play the course, depending on the wind as well. I think it does go back into your prevailing wind direction, so that will have an influence as well. But and then obviously now you finish that hole, you're constructing a new halfway house in that precinct, and then essentially players will continue on to the 10th hole, which will be, correct me if I'm wrong. Gosh, now I've got to try to remember. Was that the old 12th hole? The existing 12th hole will be now the new 10th.
The old 12th hole, yes. Now the new 10th hole plays a par 5. We've lengthened it to make it as a short par 5, but 465 of the club tees.
Yes. And then with the holes just that we're losing, you're going to be losing your 9th hole. And just remind me of the other holes, Guy, that we're
going to effectively lose the 2nd. You'll lose the 13th. You'll lose the 5th. You lose the 6th, the 17th, and the 9th.
Yeah. And then just rounding out, Guy, you mentioned you've some new partners have come on board. I was very grateful to be hosted by yourself and Dale Hayes and Roger. Had a lovely dinner at Nazi's pub, and it was really great chatting with Roger and Dale, hearing how enthusiastic they were about being part of Gowrie going forward. How would you kind of describe to people the type of experience that you are trying to create at Gowrie, and how that is something unique in the South African landscape?
I must admit, firstly, it's fantastic having two partners who are now fanatical about golf. In the past, I've tended to be the only one who's really interested in golf at both at Princess Grant and Gowrie. So having Roger and Dale on board is brilliant. But what we're all in full agreement, Roger and I have done probably 5 trips together now to Scotland over the years. And we very much would like us to end up with what I call a quirky Scottish feel. People play golf differently in Scotland to here. And if we could try and get people to think and play like they do over there, that is, one is they play quickly. They play mainly match play. So we're looking at different opportunities to create match play events where suddenly the scorecard isn't that important. You sit and in this country, we've gone the American way where you walk around, you play Stableford, or you're always counting your shots, if I can call it, as against Scotland, where you're just playing around a golf and you're playing against an opponent and the prizes aren't important and there are no sponsorships. It's just a wonderful thing as you play a game against two chaps. You play quickly, you finish in 3.5 hours for 18 holes. It takes on a different feel. Mainly you walk, very few carts. We're going to limit the amount of carts we want to put on the course. Carts are wonderful when it keeps people playing who couldn't otherwise, but we all think it's sad to see people thinking carts are just an opportunity to booze and that's, for instance, we don't allow liquor on the course, and golf must be fun, and golf must be the main focus of what you're coming for there. And we're going to try and offer a product which is pure golf, and sit and have your cold beers and many as you like afterwards. But while you're on the course, let's play golf. And we hopefully, I don't know, we might find we have to change our ways in South Africa, but we hope not. I think the new Durban Country Club is going to get people focused again. I think it's very exciting what they're doing there. And for me, hopefully that will be the catalyst for other people wanting to focus on quality golf. And we hope we want a great golfing experience more than anything else.
Well, I think it's a really great point to leave it, Guy. Just congratulations on what you have created with the existing Gowrie Farm, and I must say, as a big fan of the existing Gowrie, it was very exciting to walk around kind of your new creations, and to meet Dale and Roger and to feel their enthusiasm. I know I chatted with both of them about the sort of hickory golf and the plans around having that potentially as an option for people to come out and try, at a place like Gowrie. So you've got some wonderful accommodation options, both at the course as well as in the surrounding areas. So I just wanted to say thanks for allowing me, giving me your time to come down and visit. And just briefly, how is the course looking at the moment, and when are you hoping to kind of open up?
Yeah, we've just had Peter Makovich. Funny, we've tied up again, which is nice. They're looking after the course for us now, and the course is really looking nice. And we've got Matthew, who's taken over as greenkeeper, was at Glendower, Plettenberg Bay, and he's doing a fabulous job. So we're very excited with the future. And the new course, the greens in particular, are looking magnificent. And the fairways now with this rain, it's exciting. It's growing. You can almost hear it's growing now. So hopefully in the next 2 months, we'll certainly be in a position. I would love it if we could open in before the end of February, but that's our sort of target time. I think a good summer. Things don't grow like they do in Durban, but good growth, and it really has started. Hopefully we get it early next year sometime. Yeah, but Terence, I would just want to say how much we enjoyed hosting you, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you up at Gowrie again. You're always very welcome, and we'd love to have you back next time with your clubs, I hope.
No, absolutely. You may even have a new country member on your hands in the short future, because certainly a place that it's very fun to me, and I look forward to coming up and playing it once you guys are open. So thanks again, Guy. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll chat soon. Thank you.
Good. All the best for your podcast, and we look forward to seeing you up there.